on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is fairy tales and how we're raised to believe in happily ever after and what that's supposed to look like, and how we can be torturing ourselves when life doesn't comply with the fairy tale. The thing is that there's such a greater richness available to us. So we get to have that conversation. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Before we get started this morning, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light, lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together and vigorously rub your palms together. Feel the tickling, the tingling, the energy, the friction. And when you stop rubbing them together, feel that buzzing, that sensation of energy, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. So welcome, welcome. And so we're talking about fairy tales. This conversation came out of a conversation with a client around wanting the happily ever after. And the thing about that is that the happily ever after looks a very specific way, at least for this person. And you know, we're schooled in fairy tales. Many of us anyway are schooled in fairy tales about what happily ever after looks like. Thank you, Rosalind. White picket fence, endless house projects, a life partner, and 1.5 or 2 kids, a dog, you know, whatever it looks like, that Prince Charming is going to come. If we're girls, Prince Charming is going to come and sweep us away, and we're going to live happily ever after. Good morning, Lisa. Welcome. So good to have you here with us. We're fairy tale busting today. So the thing about these fairy tales is that they really are a vehicle of oppression. Good morning, Dido. Welcome. So good to have you here with us, joining us for fairy tales this morning, and how really how they can be a tool of oppression and depression, because we create. I mean, even growing up, whether it was through fairy tale books with princesses and princes, or it was through TV shows like Leave It to Beaver or Donna Reed's show. Now I'm really dating myself, but you know, we all have these tropes that we grew up with. Good morning, Gia. Welcome. And this is interesting because I'm imagining that happily ever after, it looks different in India than it does in the US. And I don't even know if you guys grow up with that notion of living happily ever after. And this is just such a dark. Lisa, yay! Lisa says, I love Donna Reed. And the Dick Van Dyke Show, you remember that? Anyway, the thing about this happily ever after thing is that we're taught that that's whatever it looks like to you. We're taught that that's what life should be, that that's how life should show up. And it becomes the measure. Oh, that's so funny. Lisa says, I watch it Sunday nights now, LOL. Donna Reed, that's amazing. How funny. Anyway, we get conditioned to believe that this is what life should be. And when life doesn't measure up, when life doesn't show up that way, then life is deficient, right? Not that artificial construct that was the happily ever after. Life becomes deficient because it's not measuring up to these preconditioned ideals, which were a pure fabrication. They, it wasn't based in reality. It was an idealization of what some programmers thought life should be. So Gia says, it's been the case with all Bollywood movies. I've grown up seeing them and craving for such life. What a myth that's been sold since the ages. Exactly. So we're thank you for that, Gia, because I'm not as familiar with your culture. And so we're all conditioned to believe in this fantasy world about what life is. And the thing is that there's a constraint to that fantasy, right? It looks a certain way. And the thing is that life is so much richer than the fantasy. It has so much more complexity, so much more dimension, so much more depth and possibility that is way outside the boxes that we grew up with to measure our lives against. And you look at these representations, and people are happy and people are comfortable, and the things that they concern themselves with typically are just ridiculous, like silly minor things, where life presents us with so much more dimension and such richer challenges and deeper challenges. And the thing is, it was really interesting with this client. It was really clear that there was this little girl in her that just wanted the happily ever after. And whenever life started looking like that, she'd go full blown into the fantasy. And what I mean by that is that she would deny the other complexities that were part of this whole picture, and just because circumstances were compliant enough that she could manufacture this fantasy and live in that rather than in the complexity of the relationships that were actually there. And the upshot of that is that every time the complexities would be undeniable, the fantasy crashed, and it was a huge crisis, right? Because life wasn't measuring up to the happily ever after. And so she did something really brilliant. And that was for the little girl who was very, very committed to this happily ever after. Reality be damned. She was going to have her happily ever after, no matter how she had to twist the facts. What was awesome was that she transformed it to happier ever after. And that made a profound shift for her. Happier ever after. And so that kind of, in its way, freed her from the constraints of that previous dynamic that looked a very specific way, because she did get to realize that there's a richness of possibility that the happily ever after never even imagined, and that happier ever after left space for those other magnificent possibilities to emerge. So Rosalind says it may have any area of life, relationships, jobs, residence, or health. And absolutely, absolutely. It can show up everywhere where we adopt a fantasy and then we measure ourselves against it. You know, and it may be like watching advertisements of beautiful people living this magical life on television, or you know, wherever we're getting our media and seeing advertisements and seeing this ideal, you know, like look at the commercials for different medications, and you see this, you know, fuzzed out image, you know, this soft image of people running through fields and celebrating, and like that's what life is all about. It hopefully we have those moments in life. Hopefully we get to celebrate and enjoy elements of life, but we all know that life is more than that, and that our growth and our consciousness and our depth and dimension comes from an experience that runs a gamut of emotion and experience. Lisa says that's going back to having an ideal that doesn't exist. Oh my gosh, that's exactly the case. So when we look at how a family should be, how relationships should be, you know, wherever that idea came from, it's not reality. It's not reality. It's a fabricated ideal that doesn't exist. And when we measure life against, I've had multiple clients that have had this exact issue, is measuring life against this ideal that doesn't exist. I want to be happy all the time. I want to be happy all the time. You know, or I want this relationship where it's sunshine and roses, and as another client of mine would say, rainbows and unicorn farts. You know, I mean, it's such a soul-sucking dynamic to create this illusion or to nurture this fantasy about how life should be, and then beat ourselves up and beat up the people around us when the reality doesn't measure up to the fantasy. You know, like, talk about the definition of crazy. We are probably all familiar with the definition of crazy that says insanity, that says, you know, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Well, definition of insanity is creating a fantasy and then measuring life against it, and being self-punishing and punishing of others when life doesn't match up with the fantasy. Like, wow. And we do it. This is how it should be. Things should be different. Lisa says, There's something to choose happiness. I would suspect people who expect these things don't really create the life that they want. Exactly. Exactly. So, what happens when we have this idea of how it should be, and when life doesn't measure up, then we get to be the victim, right? We get to be powerless. And isn't there so much more richness and power and possibility in choosing how we interact with life, in choosing in a given moment to choose happiness, in choosing in a given moment to let go of something that we're generating pain around over and over and over again. Isn't there power in choosing to refocus our attention, to shift our perception consciously and deliberately, rather than being at the effect of the way the wind blows and all the circumstances in our lives, rather than having all those circumstances shaping our experience? I'm miserable today. This happened, the weather is awful, so I feel terrible today. Oh, it's sunny today, so I feel great. That's madness, right? Like we are intelligent beings that have the ability to be creating our experience through deliberate, intentional focus and attention and awareness. And how crazy is it to be at the effect of the weather? And I guarantee we all know somebody who is, right? Maybe intimately, I don't know, So Rosalind says, in this life stage, allow relationship with true essence to deepen and blossom, to follow your own authenticity, freedom to learn, explore, and do and be. Absolutely, Rosalind. That's where we gain our sovereignty. That's where we gain our expression. That, through these choices to deepen our relationship with our essential being, that's where our authenticity comes from. That's where the happily comes from, right? Or the happier comes from. And when we don't do that, when we're not conscious, then we're victim to the things that we respond to with fear, anger, anxiety. It's all about taking ownership and choice. That's what it's about. Lisa says, did you ever watch the movie The Secret? Absolutely. And Lisa continues, it's all about this. It shows how to choose and manifest things. Watch it. Absolutely. It's a wonderful movie. And it's actually based in what Esther and Jerry Hicks. Has died, but Esther channels an intelligence called Abraham, and it's the law of attraction. And it's talking about how we shape reality on so many levels, not just in manifesting things, but in shifting our experience, shifting our frequency, shifting our vibration. So Gia says, I want to be happy all the time. Is such a case with teens or young adults. Even I had it for years. Well, who doesn't want to be happy all the time? I get that, but okay. And, I want a unicorn as a pet, and okay. But then I can see reality is more kind and beautiful over our fantasy. when we stop beating ourselves and learning to stay present. Exactly. Like there is so much wonder and magic in the world that we can be present to when we allow ourselves to, really be present. There's magic and all kinds of possibility. So Gia goes on, I wonder if we could ever live happily in our heads, believing that fantasy world. Why would there be so much of creativity, professions, relationships, et cetera, we need to learn to live out of our head. And that's hard. That's hard. Easy to be said. Easier be said than done for some of us, but happens through consistency, and then it flows. Exactly. Being present. That's when we get to experience the magic of the world, for sure. Good morning, Elaine. Wonderful to have you here with us. Welcome. So we're talking about fairy tales and how fairy tales, believing that the fairy tales are the standard by which we should, in big air quotes, be living, is a way that we get to torture ourselves and keep ourselves disempowered, and also keep ourselves from experiencing the magnificence of the possibilities and the reality of our actual existence. Lisa says, I proved it to myself when I got my new house. Exactly. Beautiful. A positive and a grateful mindset is mandatory. If you have a defeatist life and perception, that's exactly what you get. Exactly, because where we put our attention is where we are investing our energy. And I use the word investing very deliberately, because we are energizing whatever that thing is that we're putting our attention to. So if we're spending our energy and our attention being angry and depressed and victimized and powerless, what's our return going to be on that investment? More anger, frustration, disappointment, depression. That's what we're going to get, because we've invested that energy. We have spent our energy there, and it returns in dividends. Whereas if we invest our energy in appreciation, awareness, gratitude, attention, joy, that too is going to pay dividends. That is an investment that will pay us back over and over. If we invest in love, if we invest in presence, if we put our energy there, it feeds back to us. Lisa says you can be bitter or you can be better. That's quite a wonderful, wonderful observation, Lisa. Thank you for that. And Elaine says, have a present now, love. Or have a present now, love. So there is a gift in the present. We give ourselves the present of the present. We give ourselves the gift of the present when we are present, the gift of presence. So that is really what we're looking at, rather than, so we talk about living in the past or living in the future. This fairy tale is a whole different ballgame, because that's living in a completely fabricated world, right? And then we are wishing and wanting and wistful about this thing that just doesn't even exist. You know, it's crazy wild what we do with our mind and our energy. And so perfectionism is also this kind of fantasy. So I'm reminded of another client I had who was very perfectionistic in her orientation. You know, she had this idea about how things should be. And then when things didn't turn out the way things should be, then it was a crisis. And what happened was, instead of having these goals or expectations about how things should be, instead she moved into intention and being clear about the intention, which wasn't married to the way things showed up exactly. It allowed for things to unfold and blossom in their own right. And so the power of intention allows us the freedom to focus our energy, and in a way that's expansive and life affirming and dynamic, rather than expectation, which has a rigidness about it. And either expectations are met or they're not. And whereas intentions, we can keep reaffirming the intention. And the way that it gets expressed is fluid, right? Anyway, fairy tales. Don't let yourself be controlled, dominated by a fantasy that doesn't exist. Allow yourself to be present to the richness of the life that's actually here. Because in the fantasy, if we're measuring against the fantasy all the time, we don't get to see what's right in front of us. So Rosalind says, so no attachment to the outcome, but holding the vision, permission to allow desire, dream without the story, and have the foundation to create. I love that, Rosalind. So the intention is something that persists. The outcome, an outcome is kind of an endpoint, right? So there are byproducts, there are results that show up along the way that are byproducts, but the intention is something that is bigger, that can weather whatever the outcome is in this moment to get to whatever is emerging. And with that, I have to run. So lots and lots and lots of love to you. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here, for engaging. I can't tell you how deeply I appreciate our time together. And I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I invite you to please check out the other wonderful programming on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page, EWN One with the Earth, Enlightened World Living. And until next time, so much love to you. And Dido says, such a profound distinction of expectations versus intentions. It's a world of freedom. That's the difference between the two, Dido. Thank you so much for that. And thank you all. I hope to see you again here really, really soon. And until then, so much love.